Her bedroom window had been smashed, glass scattered across the floor. Shaking, she rushed to the window and found a brick lying amidst the shards. Attached to it was a note. "Stop looking or you will regret it." Linda's hand shook as she read the words.
You my heartbeat beats, a lady of all men's dreams.
Linda stood frozen. She was looking at the hospital building. It had been 10 long years since she left this place, leaving her newborn baby behind in the hands of strangers. At the time, she was convinced that adoption was the only way to give him a better life. But the past had a way of haunting her. She had dreams where she hears her baby cry, echoing in a cold room, his tiny fingers reaching out for her. Every night, she awoke drenched in sweat with her heart racing. She was unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She hadn't named him, she couldn't. It hurt too much. But the date and the time he came into the world were etched in her memory. June 10th, 8:35 p.m. It was a day she would never forget. "Excuse me, ma." She called to the nurse at the front desk. Her voice was trembling. "I was here 10 years ago. I gave birth to a baby boy, but I need to know what happened to him." The nurse gave her a polite look and somewhat confused smile. "Do you remember the baby's name?" Linda bit her lips, shaking her head. No, ma, I never named him. I never get a chance to, but I know the date and time. It was on the June 10th, 8:35 p.m. The nurse's expression softened, and she typed furiously into the computer. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up, her face pale. There is no record of the baby ever being transferred out of this hospital. Linda's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "The records show your baby never left the hospital," the nurse replied. I don't know what happened, but he was never discharged." Linda felt the ground tilt beneath her. This couldn't be happening. She had signed the papers. She had done what was right. But now, all those years of guilt, all those haunting dreams, were they because her son had never really left? Linda's decision to give up her baby wasn't an easy one. It wasn't an entirely choice for her to make. Linda was very young, too young. She had often told herself she hadn't been ready for motherhood, and the baby's father had disappeared long before she ever had the chance to tell him she was pregnant. She had no job, no stability, and no idea how she was going to care for a child. Her mother had been the one to pressure her into making the responsible choices. "You can't raise a baby on your own," her mother had said, her voice cold and dismissive. "It's better to give him to a family who can take care of him properly." Linda had felt trapped. She didn't want to give him up, but with no job and no support system, she saw no other option. The adoption agency had promised her that the couple they had chosen for her baby would give him everything he needed: a stable home, a loving family, a future full of possibilities. It had seemed like the right thing to do at the time. But the moment she signed the papers and handed her baby over, something inside her broke. She had never even held him, and that decision had haunted her every day since. Linda couldn't leave the hospital without answers. Over the next few days, she searched for everyone who might remember what happened that day. Shaking to her core, Linda became obsessed with finding her son. She spent weeks tracking down every lead she could, but the deeper she dug, the more dangerous things became. She started receiving anonymous threats, phone calls late at night, letters warning her to stop asking questions, but she refused to give up. She just needed to find her son. One day, while walking through the park near her apartment, Linda noticed a young boy playing by himself. He looked about 10, the same age her son would be. There was something familiar about him, the way he laughed, the way he moved. He reminded her of the baby she had given up. Over the next few weeks, Linda and the boy, who introduced himself as Ethan, began to talk. They met often in the park, and each time Linda felt a strange connection with him. It was as if some part of her knew him. He was kind, smart, and always seemed to know what she was thinking. One afternoon, as they sat together on a bench, Ethan opened up. "I don't really see my mom much," he said, kicking the dirt under his feet. "She's always busy." Linda frowned. "Who do you live with then?" "My aunt," Ethan replied casually. "But I was adopted, at least that's what they told me. I don't really know who my real parents are." Linda's heart stopped. "Adopted?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but I've always felt like I didn't belong with them, like I was supposed to be somewhere else." Linda felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was more than just a boy in the park. Linda returned back to the hospital, and the hospital staffs were cautious, their answers vague and evasive, as if there was something they didn't want her to know. But after days of persistence, she found a retired nurse who finally agreed to meet her in a secret. "I remember that day," the nurse began quietly. They sat together in a small food canteen, far from the prying eyes of the hospital. "I've been trying to forget it ever since." "What do you mean?" Linda asked, her hands trembling around her cup. The nurse glanced around nervously. "Your baby." "Ha. He wasn't adopted. He was taken." Linda's blood ran cold. "Taken? What do you mean?" The nurse leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. "The hospital was involved in something illegal. They took babies from vulnerable mothers, sold them to families under the table. There was no adoption, no papers, no legal transfer. Just bring your money and you will be given a baby. Worst of all, nobody checked to know how these babies are faring. This is far deeper than anyone. I'm so sorry. Your baby, he was one of them. He wasn't adopted, but he was sold." Linda gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "No, that can't be true. I trusted them. I tried to report it," the nurse said, her voice shaking, "but no one would listen. They covered it up." Linda couldn't control her tears. She was determined to find her son. Linda dove headfirst into an investigation, pulling at every thread she could find. But as she dug deeper, strange things started happening. One night, as she lay in bed, she heard a shattered sound. Her bedroom window had been smashed. Glass scattered across the floor. Shaking, she rushed to the window and found a brick lying amidst the shards. Attached to it was a note. "Stop looking or you will regret it." Linda's hand shook as she read the words, fear gnawing at her gut. Who would want to stop her from finding her son? The only people who know about her search were the hospital staff and her family, no one else. But the threat didn't stop. A few days later, she received a phone call late at night. The voice on the other end was calm but menacing. "You are getting too close. Walk away." Linda's heart raced. Who is this? The line went dead. Shaken, Linda began to wonder if she was being watched. Who could be doing this to her? Could it be her family? She brushed the thought aside. They couldn't know, or could they? Despite the threat, Linda refused to give up. One night, she sneaked back into the hospital, her heart pounding as she made her way to the archive room. It was late, and the hospital was nearly empty. The hallway were dimly lit, casting eerie shadows as she crept past the security desk. Her breath quickened as she riffled through the dusty files, searching for anything that could lead her to her son. After what felt like hours, she found it, a file where her name was on it. Inside, she discovered the truth. Her baby had been sold, not adopted. The file was incomplete, but the name of the family who had taken him was listed, along with an address. Linda's hands shook as she read the address. It was familiar. It was the house of the boy she had met in the park, Ethan. The next day, Linda stood outside the house, her heart racing. She had met Ethan weeks ago in the park, and something about him had always felt familiar. But now, as she knocked on the door, dread washed over her. Could Ethan really be her son? When the door opened, the woman who stood before her looked surprised, but Linda could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Linda took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you about something very important." The woman's face paled. "What do you want to talk about?" It's about your son, Ethan. I think he's my son," Linda said, her voice barely a whisper. "I gave birth to him 10 years ago, and I think he was sold to you." The woman's eyes widened, and for a moment, Linda thought she might deny everything. But then, with a heavy sigh, the woman stepped aside. "You better come in." Linda took a deep breath. They sat in the living room. The air was thick with tension. The woman looked down at her, her hands unable to meet Linda's gaze. "We didn't know at first," she began. "My husband's sister. She arranged everything. We thought it was legal, but when we found out the truth, we didn't know what to do." Linda's heart raced. "Who arranged it?" The woman hesitated before whispering. "Her name is Maria. She was a family." Linda's blood ran cold. "Maria? What Maria?" "Maria Martin." "Maria Martin?" Maria was her mother's name. Linda couldn't breathe. "My mother? Maria Martin? No, that's impossible now." The woman nodded. "She told us everything would be fine, that the baby had no other family. We paid her. We thought it was legitimate." Linda's world crumbled around her. Her own mother, the woman who had comforted her, who had told her she was doing the right thing, had sold her baby behind her back. Shaking with rage, Linda stormed out of the house and drove straight to her mother's home. She burst through the door, her voice trembling with fury. "How could you, Mom? How could you sell my son?" Her mother didn't even flinch. "You weren't ready to be a mother, Linda. I was even doing you a favor. I did what was best for him. You sold him like he was nothing," Linda screamed, tears streaming down her face. Her mother's expression remained cold. "I did what had to be done." Linda remembered every painful detail of having to let go her child. The moment she discovered that her own mother had sold her baby for money, she had stormed into her childhood home, her heart racing and her hand was shaking. "How could you do this, Mom?" Linda screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You are my mother. How could you betray me in the worst possible way?" Her mother had stood there, unflinching, as though the weight of her actions had never affected her at all. "You weren't ready to be a mother," she had replied coldly. "I did what I had to do." "You sold him, Mama. You sold my son like he was nothing," Linda shouted, her voice breaking with rage and sorrow. "He was my baby. How about that? My baby, and you took him from me. You lied to me. You told me this was the right thing, but it was all for money, Mom." His mother had sighed, her voice devoid of any guilt. "I gave him a better life, Linda. Cut off it. Stop being a crybaby. You couldn't take care of him." Linda's blood had boiled. "You had no right, Mom. No right to take him from me. So it was you. The threats, the phone calls, everything, just because you didn't want me to find out about this. You took away the only chance I had to be his mother. And look at you now," her mother had said, her voice calm and detached. "You're really fighting to get him back. Maybe this is what it took for you to finally grow up and be a mother." Those words had cut Linda deeper than any knife. She had wanted to scream, to hit something, to cry out in pain, but instead, she has stood there, shaking with anger and disbelief. "Get out of my life," Linda had finally said, her voice trembling. "I never want to see you again." Her mother had shrugged as if the loss of her daughter meant nothing. "As you wish." Linda was determined to right the wrongs her mother had committed. She took the case to court, fighting for custody of her son. The legal battle was long and grueling, with her mother fighting back and the family who had bought Ethan pleading ignorance. But the truth was undeniable. The hospital trafficking ring was exposed, and Linda's mother was revealed as one of the orchestrators. The courtroom had been a battleground. Linda had stood there, facing the family who had unknowingly bought her son, and her own mother, who had orchestrated the entire scheme. Her mother had shown no remorse, even as the evidence stacked against her. The lawyer had presented document after document, witness after witness, until the truth became impossible to ignore. The hospital illegal activities were exposed, the trafficking ring dismantled, and Linda's mother implicated as one of the key players. "I never wanted to hurt her," Linda's mother had said in her defense. "I did what I thought was best." But Linda had known the truth. Her mother had sold her son for money, not for his well-being, not for a better life. And in the end, the court has seen it too. The judge ruling had been clear. Linda will regain the custody of Ethan, and those involved in the trafficking would face justice. It had been a victory, but not without its price. In the end, justice was served. Linda won custody of Ethan, and her mother faced legal consequences for her role in the scheme. The family who had bought Ethan was also charged, but Linda knew they had been victims of the system, just like her. Linda and Ethan moved far away, starting a new life together. The pain of betrayal and loss would never fully fade, but there were thoughts now, and that was all that mattered. As they sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset, Linda smiled softly at her son. "We've got a long road ahead of us," she said, her voice filled with hope. As she smiled softly at her son, Ethan looked up at her, his young face reflecting a mixture of curiosity and relief. It had been an exhausting few months since they had finally won the legal battle, a victory that came at a cost Linda never imagined. Her family was fractured, her trust forever shaken, but in that moment, none of that mattered. She had her son, and they were starting a new life together. "Are you okay, Mom?" Ethan asked, noticing the tear that had slipped down Linda's cheek. Linda quickly wiped it away and pulled him close. "I'm okay," she whispered, kissing the top of his head. "We are going to be okay." But as much as she tried to reassure Ethan, Linda knew there would be challenges ahead. The past couldn't simply be erased. The betrayal, the lies, and the scars from the fight for justice were still fresh, and the memories of her mother's cold, calculated actions haunted her every day. As Linda and Ethan stood on that beach, their future ahead of them, Linda knew they had survived the unimaginable. The pain and betrayal of her past would never fully go away, but they had each other. Together, they had found a way to heal, and there was hope in the days to come. Turning to her son, Linda whispered, "No matter what we've been through, we are stronger because of it. We are going to be okay." Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. "We've got each other, Mom." They watched the sun set in peaceful silence, their hearts lighter with the knowledge that they had overcome. What would you do if your mother sold your child behind your back? Would you ever be able to forgive her? Share your own thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories of love, betrayal, and resilience. Thank you so much for being here today and for watching our stories. Till I see you again in my next story. Goodbye.